Hi everyone! Hi, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I thought that I would respond to some of the questions that I get sometimes about reskeining yarn. And I wanted to chat a little bit about the pros, the cons, and show you the before and after in one video. In particular, besides just general questions about reskeining, someone asked on the video that I did where I hand painted this yarn using sponge brushes and really concentrated Kool-Aid. They wanted to know what it would look like reskeined. So one of the benefits of reskeining yarn is that you can really get a better sense of how the colors mix together. So if I just show this again, how it looks right now without creating a tangle, this doesn't necessarily give you a good sense of what the yarn might look like knit up. So one benefit of reskeining is that you can see the mixture of colors, and then that can help you, I guess, maybe give you a better idea of how to imagine it in a garment. One downside to reskeining is that you will have less of an idea of the color repeats that you would see in your yarn. So here I've got a rainbow patch interspersed with white, and then one patch where the rainbow is all together. And it would be a little harder to tell that this is how the yarn was painted when it is reskeined. So different people have different preferences, and so I thought that I would go ahead and do it, and then I can also show you how I wind yarn on my Niddy Noddy. Now this is a Niddy Noddy that I created out of PVC pipe. I think it cost maybe a total of $6 for all the parts. I got everything at Home Depot. And what I like is that I can store it flat. I can take it apart. It is very, very handy, and I can adjust it to make skeins of different sizes. So right here I have a 1 foot piece of pipe, which would give me a 4 foot skein, which I think is pretty typical for what you see. And right here I have what's called a yarn swift. So some people have asked me how I manage to not to wind things into balls without getting really tangled, and the answer is this magical tool, because I can just put the skein of yarn around and open it up like an umbrella, and then it is neatly held in place. So that way I can wind it into a ball or reskein. Sometimes with these highly variegated yarns, winding it directly into a ball can also help you get a sense of the way that the colors mix, but I know a lot of knitters, and myself included, prefer to store yarn in the skein form. And okay, I'm gonna have to snip this because I don't think I can just untie that knot. But while I'm doing this, I'm also happy to take any questions, and I'll do my best to answer as I figure out where the ends of this are. And before we start going too much, I do want to give a shout out to the Dye Pot Weekly Kickstarter campaign. There are 33 hours left, and there's still a chance for you to get some awesome rewards. And if you want to learn more about the Niddy Noddy, I do have a video on the channel of when I made it. So you could tie the yarn around, but since these Niddy Noddies, the pieces come off, I actually just will stick an end of the yarn in the Niddy Noddy, because I find that is an easy way to do it. And now I am just going to start winding the yarn. And so I think that, I guess I can slow this down. I do have a video on this as well, but it'll be a little easier for me. I'll get some yarn on, and then I can show a bit closer of what this is looking like. Okay. So when you're winding yarn onto a Niddy Noddy, if you can see, so like one end of the skein is here, the other end is here, and both kind of like wraps around. And so I find holding my hand in, I'm not explaining this very well, but holding my hand in one position, I can just kind of easily wrap it around. So now we're showing one of the cons of reskeining. It takes time. If someone is doing a lot of hand dyeing and you wanted to reskein all of your yarns to sell them, it'll just take a while. And so that is an additional labor cost in what you're doing. Yeah, thanks for joining me, guys. But so the way I'm wrapping the yarn is I go under and over one side. Yeah, okay, I'm not explaining that very well. But as more yarn gets onto the niddy noddy, you can kind of get a sense, but I'll try to do this slowly because I'm moving my own hand around the niddy noddy more. And then I don't know, I found this rhythm of twisting it. But it's easier to do a niddy noddy than just wind yarn around a longer, just if I had this rotated, just winding it around the flat piece because it's just, I think, harder to hold. But I haven't done this yet, but I do have some longer pieces so that way I could use my niddy noddy to wind, say, an 8-foot or 16-foot skein. Of course, then those would be harder to put on the umbrella swift to wind up, so that would be a lot less convenient. If you're just tuning in, I am reskeining this rainbow yarn, which actually there you can see the whole thing. This rainbow yarn that I hand painted. I'm using really concentrated colors of Kool-Aid because I've gotten some questions about what this particular yarn would look like reskeined, and also just in general, people wanted to know more about reskeining. So I reskeined a space-dyed yarn. It had 3 colors, and they ended up as a self-striping yarn. Ooh, that's really cool. That's really, really pretty. Yeah, so when I do cake dyeing and stuff, I always reskein the yarn after because it is the easiest way to get it to dry. I wouldn't want like the yarn to mildew or anything. So there's some dyeing techniques, and especially if I started off with like a 16-foot skein, I would need to reskein the yarn because there's not a good way to store that. And especially if I was giving it to someone else, it would just not necessarily be easy to wind into a ball. The nice thing about the umbrella yarn swifts is that you can deal with smaller skeins reasonably well, but something much bigger than 4 feet would start to get difficult to do on the swift. And I'm not sure where I got this particular swift, but there's a similar one on Knit Picks that I'll add to in the video comments after the replay. Ooh, fruit salad yarn? That sounds fun. Okay, so we're starting to see how these colors are mixing. And so you actually get a little less of a rainbow vibe, even though we can see still from just seeing half of the swift that this is a rainbow yarn. That is not as apparent now, but also you're getting a sense of how the colors might mix. And this reskeining is actually a very hotly debated topic with indie dyers. Some people think that it makes the yarn look better. Certainly when you're buying professional yarns and you're getting a variegated color, they have been reskeined because of the batches and stuff. So it can look neater, or sometimes some people think it looks less sloppy to reskein it. Some yarns that I reskein they might have been like a little sticky or something, and I just want to make sure that things weren't felted or whatnot, but also just because it's kind of pretty. And so I'll show like a before and after of this on Instagram once it is done. Oh, and Facebook. And I got distracted and I missed a loop somewhere. So then I go backwards and unravel until I can find where, hopefully it's pretty recent, where I messed up. But see, you're getting the real live experience, mistakes and all. Okay, this has got to be soon. Nope. Hey, you guys want to see a tangle too? I bet I'll end up with one. Okay, there we go. So you do need to pay. Yeah. If I interrupt my rhythm, then it's easy to make a mistake and get a tiny little knot. But yeah, for those of you who have said that you should really try dyeing yarn, it is really, really fun. And especially, it's something that I haven't shown as much of on the channel is over dyeing yarn. So sometimes you end up with leftover yarn that, you know, what am I going to do with this color? It's not quite perfect. Or a lot of times if I'm making something or a toy, I'm like, oh, I need a little bit of red for, you know, a beak or an embellishment or something. And I don't necessarily want to buy 100 grams of red yarn for when I only need a couple of yards. And so then I'll just dye a mini skein so then I can use that for my project. And so it's really handy to be able to do that with just some food coloring and vinegar. But I'll give another, actually, I'll rotate so you can still, because I didn't even think about the like intermediate that you could see what it looked like when I dyed it and what it looks like now. So I think this might be a case where the yarn, I think I think you usually can get a better sense of what the yarn is before it's reskeined. Hi, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm not sure what interrupted us briefly, but yeah, so I mean, I kind of mentioned this before, but when the yarn, you see the yarn as it was dyed, it could be hard to picture what it could look like with the colors mixed up, but you know how long the repeats of color are. So you know, straight looking at it, that you know this is not a self-striping yarn. You know that the colors will change pretty frequently. And looking at this, you know, you can tell that there's patches of color, but it might be a little harder to tell. Looking at this, you don't necessarily know that they are in the the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple order. So you can tell that all the colors are there, but just looking at it, some of the red and orange might be a little more striking. Yeah, that's one of the nice things about using food coloring as an entryway into dyeing your own yarn, because it is really easy to find some for not a lot of money at your grocery store, and you can try it out. And I started out dyeing wool acrylic blends. I started with Line brand Wool Ease yarn because I had a lot of it, and I had finished my sampler Afghan and I didn't need a lot more white yarn. So I was like, what on earth can I do with all this yarn? And actually, well, hold on and I'll grab it. I ended up, because that was a favorite yarn of mine for a while, and I ended up turning all of these remnants into this Afghan. So I made this, I think with like, I forget if it was 6 or maybe 8 strands of yarn held together. In about 10 hours made this like really huge seed stitch Afghan. And so some of the colors were commercial colors, and this is well loved, and many, many years old, but say like in here are some of the more pastels that I dyed with food coloring ages ago. And you can get, even on like with as low as 20% wool, you can get some pretty vibrant colors. And that blanket has been living in my living room for years with a varying amount of light. And so you can still see the yarns that I dyed with food coloring, and we've never stained ourselves with it, so it has like some really nice longevity. Yeah, but you can also find, it's harder to find 100% wool yarns in some of the big box retailers, especially, well, it's harder to find bare yarns that haven't been bleached. But I also really like dyeing pale gray yarns. I'm a big fan of gray, and it over dyes nicely. And so, yeah, you can do a lot to spice up some remnants. But I really liked, so this yarn right here was hand painted with really concentrated Kool-Aid. I forget how many packets I used, but I used, 2 to 4, I think, of each color, and with a really small volume of water. But it's more, if you're going to use that many packets of Kool-Aid, it's more cost effective to go straight to liquid food coloring. Just in terms of like the cost per like amount of wool that you can dye. But I've not yet placed my order for acid dyes, but I am gearing up. And what on earth? Oh, because there we go. I haven't placed my order for any of the acid dyes yet, but I am really excited and just about ready to do that. So I know many of you who are tuning in have backed my Kickstarter campaign, and I cannot wait for you to see the first episode of Dye Pot Weekly. It's going to come out tomorrow night at about 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the Kickstarter campaign closes just a couple minutes before 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And so, yeah, it's like the campaign will end, and then I will push public on the first episode, and you can see a really, really fun dyeing video. And yeah, I have my new dye pot already. I found a really awesome one at Bed Bath & Beyond, and I am going to start using that as soon as I start filming the sponsored videos. So they're almost out of the surprise yarn skeins, but this yarn might be going to one of the backers. So if you haven't checked out the campaign, the link is in the description, and I'll drop it in the comments when I'm done. But thank you so much for your support. I can't wait to, test more different yarns and dyes. I'm really excited to use an indigo tie-dye kit. I think that, an indigo. Okay, I guess I'm back. Sorry for the connection issues. But if you just tuned in, I am reskeining the rainbow yarn that I hand painted Lucas was doing his dabbing that he is a big fan of. He asks to dye yarn with me a lot now. So he'll be making more appearances on Dye Pot Weekly. Bleach yarns pick up the colors more since it's bright. I think that, so I have sometimes dyed bleached yarns, but I think that the bleaching process actually damages the fibers a bit. And so you might get, from what I've heard, that you can actually get some better, I guess it's less damaging to the yarn to start with a more bare yarn. But yeah, in a pinch, go for the white. It certainly will take up color really, really well. But if you are starting with food coloring, you do need to have some wool or silk or other protein-based fiber in there. I haven't yet tried, I know nylon will take up food coloring. I don't know if there's 100% nylon yarns, but I do have some nylon fiber that I want to just attempt to dye to see what it does. And what, I caught on something. But we just have a little bit of the yarn left. I think, I forget, this is the Stroll fingering yarn, and I think there's 400 some yards in here. When I do hand spinning, I wind the yarn around the niddy noddy and then I actually count the wraps, and that's how I determine the yardage of my hand spun yarn. You can get fishing line measurers, or there's tools you can get that will actually, you pull the yarn through the device and it'll measure the yarn for you, which I know some people use as they're making mini skeins. Ooh, that would be really handy actually. But people also use it with their hand spun. And oh, that is strange. Oh, okay. Sometimes. Now, I will say I'm also pretty lazy, so I don't add a ton of extra ties onto my skeins as I'm dyeing. I usually stick with the 2 that were on the commercial wound yarn. Use 73% wool, 27% nylon. Yeah, so this is 25% nylon right here. But I want to see the full-on nylon fiber. Okay, so here we have finished winding, rewinding the skein, and I'm now gonna tie it off here with just the ends of the yarn. And as I said, I'll share the side-by-side comparison on Facebook and Instagram. And where did I insert the end? Over here. Haha! I really like, some of the wooden niddy noddies that are out there are absolutely gorgeous, but they start off more expensive, and so I was really excited when I read about people who created their own niddy noddies using PVC pipe. And I think that if you don't even want to make your own, you can buy them on Etsy. But this is what this yarn looks like reskeined. So I think it's not, the purples and blues aren't reading as much on camera. You can certainly get a sense that there's, a lot of white, and you can get a sense that the color repeats are short. But I think that it's a bit harder to tell that things are happening in a rainbow order. But, I do think that the finished skein itself, when it's twisted up, looks prettier reskeined than it did before, because you couldn't necessarily see all the colors. And so I think that this is like gorgeous. And, looking at it, you see that there's a rainbow. You just don't really get a sense of the progression of color. And so if you're looking at the full skein of yarn, you don't get the sense of as good of a sense of how it was dyed. But yeah, I think for picture wise, I would prefer this, but is it worth taking the, however long, the, 15, 20 minutes to reskein it? If you're selling a lot of yarn, not necessarily. But I know some people who say, oh, if a yarn isn't selling, then maybe they'll reskein it, so then, it'll look prettier, and then it'll sell. But yeah, that is, I guess, reskeining some yarn, and a little bit about some of the tools that I use. I think that, if I'm doing a dyeing technique where the skein size is non-standard, or if I'm using a fiber type where after dyeing, sometimes, even though it's not felted, sometimes the fibers stick together a little more, so it's not as pretty when handled. And so then I might prefer to reskein it. But ultimately, I think my personal preference is to not reskein, because you can show what the yarn looked like beforehand. But given that I film most of my dyeing, you can see exactly how it was dyed, and hopefully that's something that you would enjoy doing as well. And so I love seeing the pictures of the yarn you guys dye. It's really inspiring and sometimes encourages me to try something new myself. And so I really, really appreciate that. And, you know, one more plea, if you haven't checked out the Dye Pot Weekly Kickstarter campaign, I'm offering many, many rewards, and the funds are going towards yarn and dyes and the other materials for me to continue to create really, really fun dyeing videos. And there are rewards that start at $1 where you get access to the backer only updates and some behind the scenes stuff, and you know, up to, you know, you can work with me to design a video and get the yarn that I dye in the video. So there's many, many different types of rewards. And so I hope you check it out. And thank you so much for joining me for this quick little reskeining video. And once again, here is our finished yarn. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.